Here's something most coaches won't tell you. And honestly, most coaches haven't haven't figured it out yet. The reason your athletes aren't progressing the way you want has nothing to do with an exercise selection. It has everything to do with your lack of progression system. Most coaches think the answer to a plateau problem is a new exercise or changing up the entire program, the entire structure. But that's not it. So they swap out things. They have athletes look fresh for a week, then plateaus again. They swap out it again, and then what they've built without realizing it is a program built entirely off of novelty, not progression and actual adaptation and improvements. Just novelty and excitement of new exercises. And novelty is the same thing as is not the same thing as development. So today I'm going to give you a framework that fixes this permanently. It is called the macro, micro, and nano progression. And once you understand this type of progression, you will stop treating exercise selection as a menu that you just pick every time you go into the weight room. I'll do this exercise or that exercise. You'll be able to understand and have an infrastructure to allow you to actually be able to drive real results. Before I give you the 3 levels, I need to establish something foundationally. Programming is an infrastructure. What the athletes see on the board, the exercises, the sets, the reps, that's paint on the walls. The infrastructure is what's underneath. If you've ever seen a building getting built, you don't see the rebar. You don't see any of that stuff. You just see the paint and the stuff inside. Systems that determine what exercises get chosen, when it changes, why it changes, and what it changes to. Most coaches are only working at the paint level or the very surface level things. They change what athletes see without ever building the system underneath. That's why their programs feel random. That's why athletes lose buy-in, because the athletes can feel when there is no logic behind what they're actually being asked to do. Even if they don't articulate it, they feel it, and that will diminish buy-in. They just know it feels like a workout instead of training. So the fix isn't more creativity. It's not more exercises. The fix is a better infrastructure. And that infrastructure starts with understanding 3 levels of progression: macro, micro, and nano. Macro progression is the biggest change. A macro progression is when you move to a completely new exercise. And that's what most coaches live at. Oh, we did RDL, we're going to do good mornings now. A new movement pattern, a new category, a new primary joint. They go completely random because they want to just have novelty. You go from one RDL to trap bar. You go from dumbbell press to barbell press. The macro jump is intentional, and it happens at a phase transition, not random in the middle of a training block just because they feel bored with the same exercise. That is not coaching. That is giving in to the athletes' wants, and we're here to build athletes up what they need, not what they want. And they want something new. Macro progressions are the most destructive change you can make in a program. They require the athletes to relearn the movement. It's a new exercise. They have to learn it again. They spike cognitive load because they don't understand that movement so far, so they're going to mentally have to think about it. The skill level of the pattern goes backwards to the beginning. So they should be used to it and purposefully trying to do that. They are not a crutch for when you run out of ideas. They're a deliberate tool when you use an athlete that has genuinely maxed out the progression ceiling of the movement they're already in and is ready for the next one. That's the macro level, from one exercise to the next. Micro progression is a smaller change within the same exercise. Same movement pattern, same primary joint, but you adjust a variable. What are those variables? You can change the stance, wider, narrower, split stance. You can change the implement, barbell to dumbbell, cable to band. You can change the points of contact: 2 feet on the ground, 1 foot on the ground, holding a rack, holding a PVC pipe. You change the loading angle or the range of motion. The exercise family stays intact. The movement intent stays the same. But something shifts that creates a new stimulus without abandoning the foundation learning you've already built. Because you learn the movement, you make a small variation, they have a smaller cognitive load, which allows them to progress better. The micro progressions are incredibly powerful because they let you extend the life of the movement for months, sometimes years, without ever making a macro jump. They build depth into the pattern, and depth is what drives real adaptation. Most coaches skip this level entirely. They go straight from macro to macro because it looks to the athlete as something new, as something better. And when they always start jumping to new exercises before the athlete has actually extended and got everything out of that one exercise, there's nothing left to offer. There's nothing else to do because they've already done everything. So you need to use the micro. Nano progression is where you really change programs from week to week. A nano progression is where the load, sets, reps, and tempo all live. This is where you know the program is progressing. You could have the same exercise with no variation, with 3x8 sets, with 1,000 tempo, and if you just did 3x9 reps, that's a micro progression. You can literally shift an entire training session or an entire session just by nano progressions. You could have the same exercise for years and just change the nano progressions, and the athletes will still be able to get better. But the stimulus has changed because the infrastructure variable has changed. That's the nano level. It's the quietest level and the most underutilized one in the weight room. Most coaches blow past it because they think nothing is happening. Something is always happening. Load is going up. Volume is accumulating. Intent is sharpening. The body is adapting. And that's where we need athletes to live, is adapting. And it's adapting clearly on a movement it already knows, which means the athlete can push harder because they're not spending their mental load on trying to learn the exercise. They can actually drive true adaptation when we start looking at nano progressions. And here's how it plays out in real program. Let's say your hip hinge exercise is a RDL deadlift. That's the exercise you chose because when you run it through the exercise funnel, primary joint is going to be the hips, primary pattern, primary joint, primary movement is going to be the hip flexion extension. Output, so what does that mean? Output as much force as possible because we're using a barbell. You then select the best exercise for that. You then look at the nano level. What is the best volume that will allow you to drive the specific adaptation? This could be a 6x3 with a low duration. That's going to allow the athlete to produce a lot of force with a lot of load. But let's say you then change it to a durability day. We can use the same frameworks, but because the intent is durability, we may do reverse hypers with a nano progression of 4x20 with a longer duration. And this is how a nano progression is so useful. It allows them to hone in the technique and lock it in. Their output is going to climb over time. Then at week 8, you go to a micro. You move from a bilateral to a single. You then drive different stability demands, same hinge pattern. You run another nano cycle through the same variation, load, volume, different exercises for anything you can do for as long as possible. Then at the end of the phase, you change it again. We have to keep athletes in exercises that are going to be more than just a single exercise or just a random exercises here and there. We have to look at what is our macro, what is our micro, what is our nano. First, start looking at the nano progressions. Let's try to drive all those. Then we look at the variations within the exercise from a micro. We then change the macro. For majority of athletes' training session, the macro exercises will never change because we're building into those macros. The back squats, the deadlifts, the bench press will always be the same because that's the expression exercise. Those are the things that we're actually trying to drive true adaptations out of. The nano progressions and the micro progressions are going to be the things that we're going to change. But here's the thing. Most athletes don't recognize those as changes. They want the macro change. They want the deadlift to the back squat because it is the most noticeable visually. But if you explain to them that it may take 16 weeks to drive full adaptations out of an exercise, you'll see that they'll understand, like, oh, this is why we're doing it, because they will see the actual increase. Now I want to talk about the exercise funnel that gives you what you want. You have the macro, you have the micro, you have the nano, gives you when and how much. Once you build that into your programming, you stop guessing. You stop reacting. You stop treating the weight room like a highlight reel, and you start treating it like an actual place where athletes will develop the environment and buy in and get better, and not just a novelty of I always change exercises. Your athletes will feel the difference. Their buy-in will go up, not because you made it more exciting, but because the program finally has logic. They see it. They will notice it. They can feel it behind every session. If you want the full system, the exercise library, the funnel, the progression model, the intent assignments, it's all inside the athlete buy-in system. The link is in the description. And remember, systems drive success. See you next time.